Okay, good evening, everyone, once again, and welcome to the third edition under the Masterclass series. Before I start, a very warm Happy New Year to all of you. I hope this year brings all of you a lot of health, good health, happiness, and we can put back the previous year as soon as possible as well. One of the most interesting things that I came across this year when I was reading up on, what sort of New Year resolutions are people keeping up was also to sort of start focusing on their finances, how to manage personal finances, how to make my money grow, rather how to make my money work for me. I guess that's also been a spurt in this interest area, predominantly because of what the pandemic left us on a sudden note. So I think that's where we're headed, and it's good to know now that there are more number of people being more financially conscious and wanting to sort of avoid any such exigencies as well. One very key concept under finance when we talk about is value investing. I think every time we talk about Warren Buffett, we talk about Charlie Munger, we talk about Benjamin Graham, I think the key phrase that comes across is value investing. But what is value investing? Why is it not so often spoken about, maybe as much as a regular trading stock, or as much as the traditional ways of growing money are spoken about? So we're going to be discussing all of this. I have with me Professor Sujay Joshi. Professor Sujay is a professor of finance with the Flame University. Sir has been with us for quite some time. Definitely one of the most loved professors on campus that I've ever come across. He's a chartered accountant. He's completed his PGDM from IIM Ahmedabad, and he has over 30 years of experience in fund management, corporate finance, and in general management as well in the manufacturing sector. Sir has also been part of the board of directors of various companies. He has worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the consulting services divisions and as a CFO at various other companies like Sinarmas and Thermax. So I'm not going to take too much of everyone's time. When I said that, I've always known you to be one of the most favorite ones, I stand by it because I can see in the attendees as well, there are so many of them who are your own students. So I'm hoping that everyone has a good reunion here post New Year, and it's all yours, sir. Completely.
Thank you so much, Anju, and very kind of you to have introduced me the way you have. And it's a great opportunity for me also to be able to connect with a lot of my alumni, my ex-students and my current students. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity, whatever title you might give into a master class, etc. Uh, Obviously, this kind of topic has attracted a lot of attention, and there has been a lot of negative kind of, I wouldn't like say negative entirely, but anti-value investing kind of posturing that's been happening because of the volatility that we've been facing for the last 9-10 months. So it's nice to have this kind of a session, and welcome to all the participants here. My whoever is, whether it's a flame student, aspiring student, non-flame participant, a warm welcome to all of you. Obviously, the topic that we are going to get into is something which, in some places like the Columbia Business School, they take over 1.5 years to cover. At Flame itself, we have a course on value investing which takes over 2 terms, which involves theory and projects, etc., and a great experiential experience. And to crunch it into say 45 minutes to 1 hour is in itself a challenge. But I think nonetheless we need to, like investors, we look at opportunities to grab whenever they come our way. And it's nice of you to have offered this opportunity to enthusiasts in finance. Uh,
Thank you so much, sir. It is
so
extremely our pleasure. Absolutely.
it's actually it's a huge task for somebody like me to talk about people like Benjamin Graham and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. I mean, and so many others who have been great participants in the journey of value investing. What I will try to cover very in my own humble way is try to say that what are the virtues of value investing, what are the characteristics and the way one looks at value investing from an academic point of view. Obviously, I'm not going to name companies in this presentation. I'm also not going to give data with regard to a lot of the success stories people have had on value investing. That would be, a separate session when we get some practitioners to talk about how they have participated in their journey. Uh, I would also, refrain from naming individuals who have except the people who added huge amount of content by way of conceptual clarity and contextual framework. My favorite theme for the classroom always is CCCF, where we like to bring in the conceptual clarity and in the contextual framework, and it helps to bring in that kind of, and that's where I will name these individuals and who have added so much value in the CCCF approach. So if I may be permitted, let me, I mean, generally my classes are not presentation-based classes, so I
It's going to
rarely
be a
use
change for
PPT.
you as well.
It's a change for me as well, and I'm sure for a lot of our participants. So the format that we will do is I'll talk about this topic and the changing scenario for the next 35-40 minutes. We'll then open it up for question and answer session. And then maybe you'll have the discussion with some of the participants here, and then move on.
Sure, sir. Definitely.
Right?
All yours. Yeah.
Okay. So, investors, nothing to be feared, nothing to be lost. It's just to be understood. Something very important for investors, and whether you're playing with your own money or you're a trustee as a fund manager. Important to understand what happens, the causality of the aspects, the causality of investing, etc. Obviously, this is the way we work with at Flame. And at Flame, the whole concept of liberal education has helped us to incorporate value investing as a body of knowledge, incorporating various areas which we would like to bring in, whether it's psychology, behavioral sciences, mathematics, and a whole range of finance, of course, economics. We would like to bring in history. It is one of our favorite areas in finance at Flame, and it goes with our DNA. And one needs to acknowledge what the founders of this university have brought to the table. They're one of the finest practitioners of value investing in this country, and very passionate about this whole world of investing. And I dare say some of our courses which are held in June are possibly the best in this country in that space. We get speakers from not only in India but overseas. So let's start off this by first let's understand what the classical definition people have used in terms of value investing. It's a strategy, people say, that involves picking stocks that appear to be trading for less than their intrinsic or book value. Value investors actively ferret out stocks they think the stock market is underestimating. So here, what are we saying? We're not saying that you're buying stocks at throwaway prices. The key thing here is that they're available below their intrinsic or book value. There is a market mismatch that is happening where at some point in time, the prices are available below their intrinsic value. At the time these concepts were initiated by Benjamin Graham and then followed up by his disciple Warren Buffett in just the post World War kind of scenario. Book values were significantly important in the kind of companies that most people were tracking, and even today, book value becomes very important part for tracking areas like financial and banking services, etc. But for manufacturing sectors and for other services companies, we kind of moved away from book value computation to a more intrinsic value approach. And therefore, combining the concept of efficient market hypothesis, which is one of the tenets of financial theory, where we expect everybody to have all information, everybody to have the same kind of ability to process, and therefore to be able to arrive at efficient decisions, and therefore not have a kind of match with regard to pricing. Unfortunately, in reality, we understand that these things don't exist as of now, at least. Maybe 20 years, 30 years down the line, when everything moves in towards the whole world of AI and you've got advanced computing kind of facilities available to everybody, maybe the efficient market hypothesis works far more efficiently than it does today. And in this efficient market hypothesis, therefore, in the last few decades, there have been opportunities where there is a mispricing in terms of how stocks should be priced. And that's the opportunity people in value investing are looking at. It's not necessary that we're looking at cheap stocks in terms of price to earnings multiples, or it's cheap relative to their intrinsic value. So value as defined by the person who's intending to invest, and in the manner in which, and we look at certain aspects of how valuations could be, it's an approach that people have. And price, which is the same for all of us. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're in Mumbai or in Delhi or in New York, the market provides the price. So when you see this kind of mismatch, sometimes the mismatch is for a very long period, maybe 8-10 years, like we saw in companies in consumer durables area, multinationals. Or it could be a very short period in say 10 to 15 trading sessions that we saw in March, April this year. So it's something that, it's a new concept that this price to value mismatch stays for a very short period. And that happened because of certain external kind of factors that on the basis of which the market was being traded. So what kind of characteristics have we seen with regard to the companies that have qualified? So they're in two parts. We're going to look at value investing from two parts. One is we're looking at companies to invest in, which meet certain criteria and certain characteristics and certain features. And at the same time, value investing looks at how investors should approach the whole area of investing. So we are going to look at characteristics of the stocks which have gone into the portfolio of value investors, and also the characteristics of the investors themselves, and what kind of discipline and what kind of features they've had to follow in terms of their own processes. And then we look at what changes that are happening around us. How are that changing either the companies that we are looking at, or the manner in which the investors themselves have to react and process. So the first part is we're looking at businesses and companies which have been part of the portfolio of successful value investors.
Sorry,
and these are some of sorry.
So just sorry, if I may interject, I don't think we can see your screen. We're not able to see your screen. It needs to be shared yet.
Okay. So you were not able to see the first screen either, is it?
No.
Oh.
You'll have to just click on the share screen and the slide board. Keep the slide open and then, yes, I think it's just started. Yes, now we can see.
So you missed this?
Yes, we got just a bit with your time. I think we are at the characteristics part, right?
This one?
No, sir, we've not seen any of this. Right?
Okay. So that's when I said, don't you need to be afraid of.
Yes.
Not teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. I'm not equating myself with any great teacher like him, but I guess that's the way the teaching profession is. And that's the definition that I just spoke about.
Yes, sir.
So these are the characteristics of those super stocks that we're talking about, and the dominant theme about most of these companies is that they have a very strong market leadership, whether in terms of market share or in terms of ability to price the products in that sector, in that area. You have companies. So in the past you have companies where going back to what C.K. Prahalad had said, that the rule of three, where as the sector evolves, as the economy evolves, in each sector you will find 3 to 5 companies which control 70 to 80% of the market share, and the balance 20% of the market share is held by maybe 5 companies or 5,000 companies. And those 3 to 5 companies which are very important in terms of how you track the growth of that sector, and particularly for investors. In the last 15 years, those 3 to 5 concept has moved to the winner takes all kind of scenario, where there is only one player and the rest are may or may not be around either. So 3 to 5 versus winner takes all. These are the two scenarios that we're now talking of investors for companies that we're looking at. And therefore market leadership, dominant features to products, etc., is provided by these companies. scalability has been kind of a thing that we've noticed in all these companies. Their ability to take up the size of the market as well as the share of these companies, and therefore their ability to ramp up production, ability to scale up companies, operations, etc. And that has been a great benefit so in terms of operating leverage, etc. Great advantage to investors. Strong moats. We've all read about moats. Morningstar has some great definitions on how moats should be read and viewed. Brands, distribution, technology aspect, management, innovation, etc. Another feature is a low capital intensity, and that could be viewed as a high return on capital employed. And people like Warren Buffett keep saying that the best situation is where a company can grow without the shareholder having to put in any kind of additional capital. Obviously, some companies have grown by resorting to debt, but if companies can resort to the growth requirements and not at all meet capital requirements, but purely meet their growth in terms of working capital requirements by internally generated resources, generates a high ROC and high return. Predictability of earnings helps. And when we talk of the 4 features of income in our finance classes, we talk of ascertainability, predictability, scalability. These are the 3 or 4 factors that we talk of. 2 of them feature in these characteristics of the super stocks. Some of you might recall from your classes in finance. The last point is about compounding. And the compounding is of surpluses and the returns that the companies generate over their existence. And most of these companies actually, people, the distinction one would like to make here is that these companies have been around even before the investors actually got into them. So for value investing, they're not looking at startups primarily. You're looking at maybe companies which get listed recently. That's a different concept, but the businesses should have been around for some time to have demonstrated these features. I think that is one of the prime kind of features that investors look at in value investing. You're not looking for an unknown business. You're looking at businesses which have demonstrated in the past substantially superior returns and superior performances compared to other companies. Let's look at it from the other point of view, which is from the investor's point of view. So what are what are businessmen or investors looking to? For one, they're not looking to buy stocks. They're looking to buy or get into businesses. And when you look at businesses and versus stocks, there's a big difference in the sense that you're not, in that sense, driven or hampered by the current market price, etc. You understand businesses from the cycles that they operate in, whether it's the short-term cycle, medium-term cycle, and the long-term cycle. And therefore, the whole concept of cycles becomes very important when you see how investors should look at. Historically, since the 80s, we've had, or even earlier, people like Warren Buffett have followed a principle called buy and hold. And the whole buy and hold principle has been on an externally driven environment of whether it's interest rate cycles or market cycles, etc., where you bought into stocks and didn't have to sell. So those are kind of companies. So people say value investors like Warren Buffett don't sell stocks at all. Is that scenario changing? We'll look into that as we go along. So should you look at businesses and not stocks? So when you look at businesses, then you can then decide which stock you want to pick up in that business. Love the business you buy into. We had this discussion earlier today about the heart and the mind, and start loving the business that you buy into, and not love something and then start buying into it. It doesn't make economic sense. So once you've bought into that business, you need to know everything that is happening in that business, right from the players, the market capacities, the buying preferences, the margins, everything that you would like to, and we go into those details later. Invest in companies you understand. So, Warren Buffett and other speakers have talked about the circle of competence. Their circle of competence can work at both ways. One competence is about the companies not getting into businesses they don't understand, which means companies should also be doing businesses which they understand. And second is the investors themselves should be investing in companies that they understand. If you don't understand chemical businesses because it's highly technical, stay away from them. If you understand consumer businesses because easier to grapple with in terms of basic business ideas, go into it. Even people like Warren Buffett stayed away from technology companies. He's a great friend of Bill Gates, but didn't invest in Microsoft for many years. And I think one of his initial investments in technology was actually IBM in post the 2008 crisis. So investors, it's important to understand just because somebody recommends a stock, it doesn't mean you get into it. You have to, since you have to understand all the details of what happens in these stocks, in these businesses, it's good that you must understand what these companies do. Find well-managed companies. You're a passive investor, you're not going to run the business, and therefore it's very important that you identify good promoters, good management who can be relied upon, and who would take care of your company as trustees. This is a very kind of stated kind of concept, but to me, this is one of the most important aspects of value investing. The ability to read. So superior financial performance in 1 year or certain short period of time is not necessarily a criteria for defining it as a well-managed company. There are various aspects of governance, etc., which we can have sessions and sessions on how to look at management of companies to decide what kind of companies you want to invest in, which are, what kind of management you want to back. Don't stress on diversification. If you have good ideas and those ideas are working, and you don't need, the corporate finance theory often talks of risk mitigation through diversification, etc. The value investing approach, as I said, is in any case going against the efficient market hypothesis and believes that there are points in time when that efficient market hypothesis provides you that opportunity of mispricing. At the same time, it goes against this diversification approach. So back your gut. What's your basic theory and basic theme? Your best investment is your guide. So there is often this debate about Charlie Munger being asked, have you had an interesting debate on cost of capital? And he says, I've hardly had any person to, whether it's CFO or CFO with whom I could talk about cost of capital. And it's something he was actually ridiculing. But that's when Warren Buffett came in and entered into that conversation and said, look, it's not about cost of capital computation per se, but when our best investment is getting us a return of say 35%, that becomes my benchmark for investing in future. So if I have an existing investment which is getting me that 35% return on equity, why should I look for something new? I'd like to add more capital to that itself. So as an investor, you need to keep tracking what returns your investments are providing, and you don't necessarily have to look for new opportunities all the time. So the buy and hold opportunity works with that. Ignore the market 99% of the time because a lot of it is noise. We'll come to this. Does value investing still work? Does it still work in terms of time series cycle? We'll talk about it a little later. So what is the process that we've all have had to look at in terms of identifying companies? So this is the kind of work that most of us have to do when you look at companies in value investing, look at understanding the businesses. By and large, if you really look at it, it's some of these basic points which need to be covered when you look at any company. If you notice here, most of the points here are about the micro level. It's more about the companies, which is bottom-up approach. We're not. It's so there are people who involve the top-down and the bottom-up approach as a combination when it comes to value investing. But some of the veterans of value investing are swear by the concept of a bottom-up approach. They look at companies and just stick to understanding those companies and their businesses, etc. And say they're not concerned of how the interest rates will influence their business decisions, their investment decisions. They're not looking at the macros per se. But there is another set of another group of people who would like to combine the top-down approach. Particularly with foreign institutional investors, there is a top-down and a bottom-up approach combination. and that's where they like to pick up the top 2 or 3 players in each sector. Whereas hard, well kind of entrenched value investors in India, they would swear by the kind of returns they've got with companies, even if they're not in the top three in terms of market share, etc. So it's about the products of the company, the pricing, the features, what customers like, the market share, the cost structures, the technology, uh, the background of promoters, your ability to read the annual reports. I mean, each of these topics, we have sessions on individual sessions or combined session or multiple sessions on many of these topics. Uh, I'm sure there is a lot of material on the net and in terms of literature, in terms of courses that are offered all over the world on how to go about doing this kind of work. But theory is one side to it. Your ability to do this in real life is little different, because as an investor, where do you access this kind of data? Financial data is often available is available on listed companies. But some of these topics here, cost structures, for instance, what are the product level margins and markups, etc., are not really shared by companies unless you go to the cost audit reports and things like that. Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg terminals often give you some more information than that is readily available. So if you have to go down this path of value investing on a full-time basis, please do subscribe to some very strong databases where you can keep getting this, the information on these companies on a regular basis. And don't just rely on the published data that is coming on quarterly results to the exchanges, etc. You need to do more operational and business oriented kind of analysis. And the most significant part is that don't be driven by the numbers. The numbers will evolve if the models are right and if the structures are right, rather than saying that the numbers are important and the numbers are driving the business model. Most businesses, you should start looking at the other way around. If the products are right, the business model is right, they will inevitably result in financials which are acceptable as investors. The thing about one thing that we need to understand here about value investing is that as compared to other forms of investing like growth investing, etc., is that there is a reasonableness of expectation of return that investors are looking at when you're talking about value investing. They're not looking at, often when we have discussions, when we talk to each other about investing, and people keep saying, "What I'm looking for multi-baggers. Can you suggest a multi-bagger, a 5-bagger, or a 10-bagger kind of?" So there is this concept of volatility of earnings. So would you look at a business where the earnings are, say, up 50% in 1 year, down, and next year it's up only 3%, followed by 40% up, and up by 4% or 5% next year, and up again 30%, as against a business which gives you a steady kind of growth of 15% to 25% year on year? The valuations will change. Predictability, the concept that we talked of, helps in bringing about smoothness in these earnings. Investors, particularly value investors and worldwide, would look at no volatility in earnings, smoother earnings over a period of time. And that's why you need a company which has a track record of in terms of market share, etc. It's come out of that phase of a startup volatility, etc. So there are very many features that will go into defining what is attractive in terms of understanding businesses, etc. And I think I love you to participate in some of our courses at Flame and get to share, learn through your experiences here. One of the concepts that has been put forth is about sustainable competitive advantage when people go in for value investing. And sustainable competitive advantage can mean many things, but some people, some of the proponents of value investing, Michael Mormison and others, have basically summarized it well to say that it's a business which can generate a superior return over its cost of capital over a sustained period of time. So it's the net that he's talking about, which is generating superior return over the cost of funds or cost of capital for that business. And over a period of time is important because as a market leader, if somebody is generating supernormal returns, uh, would it if you could just send in your query, and we'll take up all the queries, Mr. Dugan, at the end of the session. Yeah. So cost of capital over a period of time gets, your returns start getting affected if, your competitors start picking up some of the things that you've been doing. Somebody starts improving their ability to market the product, supply chain, technology changes, etc. So, in fact, even aspects like moats, etc., uh, could undergo changes, and therefore the ability to sustain that competitive advantage over a period of time might get impacted. So there is one a numerical kind of assessment that we're looking, and there is of course that has to be backed and just. So we're looking at the cause and effects of in a value investing mode. Ideally, a business should be able to sustain its competitive advantage over a very long period of time, and then the line stays flat. Something like a Coke or a Gillette, for instance. But in most cases, the competitive advantage line actually goes downwards, tending, I wouldn't say it doesn't touch the zero line because it shouldn't, but then it doesn't qualify as a value investing unless it becomes a very commoditized kind of a business, and which nobody has any special advantage except maybe size. And we've seen that in sectors like steel, for instance. Uh, so understanding sustainable competitive advantage, very important to understand some of these concepts. What are because competitive advantage across different sectors are different. uh, how do companies maintain those competitive advantages are through the moats that they create uh, through entry barriers, etc., and how do they preserve their ability to maintain those or generate those higher returns. Margin of safety is a concept which Seth Klarman has been attributed to, and we've studied concept of margin of safety in our courses in costing, where we look at the relationship of margin of safety with reference to break-even points, etc. And the similar concept works in investing, where we try to relate the break-even points to what should be your threshold level and how close to those threshold levels are you really buying. So are your if your prices are below the value that you've determined on the basis of your understanding of the business, your margin of safety is higher than it would be if your prices are above the value that you would work at. So prices, like I said, price is something which is common to all of us. Value will be independent of all of us. In the sense that each of us has the ability and the right to determine a value. Uh, I might decide attribute a certain value to a certain business. You might attribute a certain. So if there are 80 of us in this class, you might have 80 definitions of value. And valuation, of course, is a different model in itself. Uh, it's not a precise science. It works in a range, and valuation. We have courses on valuations handled by very astute professors at Flame, and valuation is something which has become very numerically driven kind of a concept. It's become very Excel driven. However, unfortunately, and which is an unfortunate part, and really, because as I said, if you go back to how value investing really works, is have you understood the business model? And if the business model and the structures are right, the numbers would fall in place. Unfortunately, because of our preference with a toy like Excel, we get carried away by a lot of these exercises in our pursuit of attempting to create multiple scenarios. So like we say, in investing, we don't we would like to stay away from using the term predictions of what prices that we are looking at, but we are certainly looking at projections in terms of scenarios that might play themselves out, and how those projections play themselves out, the valuation would look differently. So we're looking at historical data. You're looking at valuations on price to book value, which is historical. In the present context, you look at what are replacement costs or what are disposal costs. If the business were to be sold today, what price would it fetch? If you were to invest in a new business today, what price would it fetch? Some of these commodities like cement, etc., valuations often are done at enterprise value per ton, etc. They have become easy benchmarks to kind of understand. Not that they are the most efficient one, but they are easy to understand and from a numerical point of view. Of course, when you invest, you must look at many more other things. In fact, as valuation on the future basis is concerned, the most popular part has been the discounted cash flows, and that's where financial theory and valuations, have played a very significant role in the way the stock markets have appreciated in the last few decades. And the whole model of cost of capital, discounting with the cost of capital, and putting terminal value in as a very significant part of the overall valuation, has driven the valuation higher and higher from a pure seller's point of view. And we've noticed that terminal value ranges from over 50% in many cases to as high as 80-85%. Now, 80-85% of terminal value is, of course, going to be a very difficult proposition for any investor to look at. And that's where, when you look at value versus price, the ability to judge terminal value is important. Ability to see the cycle of that business, and when you judge terminal values, is very important. If you're investing in energy business and you're looking at thermal plants, which are and you see what is the terminal value for coal plants. If coal is going to go out of business over the next 5-10 years, you don't have any terminal value. So the value, should you really be investing in those kind of businesses, even though the prices are low. So terminal value is often driven up by hype, etc. And therefore, for steady businesses, ability to compute terminal value over, there are various terms that are used in theory, but I think a good understanding of how terminal value should be computed is very important from a value investing point of view. Otherwise, it becomes a very mechanical exercise. Most people are driven to just taking the formula and putting that formula without really applying their mind to say that, is it fair for me? Why should I be paying that kind of terminal value? I remember when we were borrowing debt from IDBI and ICICI in the 90s and late 80s and 2000. The terminal value for a lender often used to be the sale value of their current assets and maybe fixed assets. Now that is how low it could have gone. So if you are looking at a lender's point of view, the terminal value can go down that low. If you're a buyer, you'd obviously look at very low terminal values. You're a seller, and that's why I said the whole model has built, and that way it's been propagated. And it's taught at all MBA schools. All MBAs follow that. It's like a mantra, which without applying their mind, it's become very mechanical. So please do understand the implications of cost of capital and terminal value. To me, the most significant numbers which really alter your whole assessment. Various other aspects as investors that you need to upgrade yourself and ensure that you have a proper understanding into your own fears and your mental patterns, and you understand your circle of competence. You need a lot of patience as value investor. Don't get carried away because the markets are running away or falling, etc. Be careful, invest in yourself, and the importance of a checklist. I think a lot of investors in this space of value investing have emphasized the need for checklists, and in the last 1 year, I think one can't emphasize how useful the checklist approach has been for investors. There have been a lot of new recommendations that people have received. Go into these kind of stocks, look at these companies, etc. But the checklist approach, if you have it, so your whole definition of how you would like to invest and using a checklist. And the checklist, of course, takes time to prepare. There are a lot of material on the net, how checklists should be prepared. And checklists are individual, investor driven. It depends on the appetite and the way you would like to look at it. There's been some great Indian experience in the value investing framework. Mr. Ramdev Agarwal from Motilal Oswal has eloquently built this whole QGLP framework. I'm sure a lot of you have read about this and actually practiced it. Quality, growth, longevity, and pricing framework. very practical. Obviously, this requires companies to have been around for at least 10, 15 years if, in terms of business. And then that's how the whole model builds up. Mr. Parag Parekh is one of the first few writers and investors in this country. There'll be many others. I think Mr. Parag Parekh has been one of our, on many of our programs, he spoke very eloquently about the virtues of value investing. His book is also used as study material in combination with behavioral finance. Very good work. You should read that. So what's the new post-COVID scenario looking like? I mean, I'm not talking about the limitations of what the virus has done. I'm looking at it more from investing point of view. Obviously, it has disrupted our way of life. We can't move around. We should have held this program in our classroom, for instance. For the benefit of our students should have been on campus, etc. But from a business point of view, what I've tried to kind of summarize some of the aspects that are changing in the environment around us. Uh, Technological innovations, primarily digital format, etc. We get very, whether it's the self-driven cars or electric cars or new materials that are coming in to replace rubber or steel, etc. The fintech revolution that we keep talking about the in the cash management businesses, or a company like Bajaj Finance applying or deploying models of analytical models to be able to, and the whole range of courses that have come up in analytics to back these kind of scenarios. Disruptive technologies which have changed the way things were being produced earlier or will be produced in future. Currency wars is something that we started seeing, looking at how the dollar is, and in the last few decades we've seen wars around goods under GATT, under WTO, under movement of people, on interest rates, on movement of funds and liquidity. I think the scenario is already set now for wars between regions and countries, etc., on the basis of which, on the strength of currencies. We are already seeing India as a beneficiary of the reduction in value of the dollar. The dollar index is something we'll have to keep monitoring all the time. Who thought we'd reach a P of 38 in the kind of context in the post-COVID scenario? However, to judge whether a P of 38 is low or high, if for instance 1 year 10-year bond, so 1 year commercial paper is available at below 3.5%, you or 3%, around 3 to 3.5% translates into a P of say 30, 33. Equity you're getting 38. It's not too far away. So these are some of the things purely from a number and investor point of view you'll have to look at. There's a huge influx of global liquidity with things kind of liquidity we've never seen, and I don't know what impact it's going to have on us in the long run. It's obviously going to translate into a lot of inflation, as most experts are predicting. Let's see how it plays itself out and how it gets sucked out by the countries where they're able to protect themselves from those inflationary pressures. It's going to have an impact on all our investment approaches, our themes, etc. There's a huge shift in the last few years away from direct investments from ETFs, etc., to private equity funds, hedge funds, etc., more active funds. I think by and large we've had to be we have to be careful that we don't get carried away by the changes that are happening around us. So if you go back to what Professor, that the rule of three, where you said that as the sectors evolve, as the companies evolve, only 3 to 5 or maybe one takes all kind of scenario emerges in sectors. So you'll have to find out, for instance, in consumer products, you've got 8 or 10 large multinationals which control all the business, whether it's Unilever, P&G, General Foods, Kraft, Walmart, etc., in the retail space. So if you see the global GDP, maybe 1/3 of the GDP is already covered by some of these large multinationals. 1/3 is where this battle is underway in the new scenario through technology innovations, etc. Uh, I personally feel the global GDP is going to go up exponentially, because if you look at the velocity of money going up because of digital currencies and fintech revolutions. If you say Q into P, that translates into a GDP formula. Uh, and if that happens, the biggest problem in the world, which is debt to GDP ratio, might get sorted out in a sense. And which will mean that as investors, we look for businesses which are steady, which have been around for some time and unlikely to get disrupted over the next few years, and focus on those businesses which are not going to change tomorrow. As long as you can maintain that balance and state of mind and not get carried away by all the new innovations that are presented to us on a daily basis, I think that's when the sense of balance will be required. And of course, a sense of expectation of reasonableness of return. I think both these are extremely important. There's a lot of issues that can be debated here, and where we can have lots of material to read. For those who have started their journey on value investing, would like to start off, I think these are some of the basic material that you should all read. The Intelligent Investor, of course, Warren Buffett's Letters to Shareholders, Margin of Safety by Seth Klarman, Peter Kaufman's Poor Charlie's Almanac, and Howard Marks. The most important thing, you could also go to Howard Marks' website and download all the letters which they send to their shareholders. And ultimately, it's what Charlie Munger says about value investing, is that it's remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. So a sense of balance, not trying to be a pioneer in terms of investing. Some people have that flair, some people love, and then you be a value investor. Instead of being a value investor, be a private equity investor in the areas that are coming up. Maybe you'll get very good returns in the next few years, and then come back to value investing for a period of time. But value investing, as it is, will also continue parallel. Your ability to understand or judge what, the more we change, the more we remain constant, is an old forgotten kind of a quotation. So you've got to find out the more that we change, what is it that has remained constant around us, and seek investment opportunities in that space. So I think with this, I will take a pause, and we will now open it up for some discussion. And I'm sure there are some participants here who have, you can put up your questions in your.
Yeah, so we already have a couple of questions here on the Q&A box. So I'm going to just start off with one which probably looks at the basics of value investing. This is by Mr. Hemant.
Is Mr. Goenka here?
No, sir. I mean, I was just trying to locate him. I don't think Mr. Goenka
is or any other practitioner who would also like, and I think we would like to, look at some practitioner of value investing who can also share his views here. I think it's
absolutely. So what I'm going to do is, if you have any practitioner in the audience, if you could just raise the hand or put in, identify yourself in the Q&A box, I think we can.
We'll come back here and then add them as a participant, as a
panelist
later. Yeah, that'll be great.
Absolutely.
And I dare say, and I'm sure some of our alum have become practitioners.
Now.
They are. I mean, quite a few of them are doing very well as practicing investors.
Absolutely. So if any practicing managers here, please let us know so we can at least have your views as well. So by the time I think we have one person here. Simran, Simran, I'm going to allow you to talk. Give me 1 minute. Let me promote you to a panelist, and maybe you can. Okay. She'll just join in a minute.
Let's start off with the Q&A then. In the meantime.
Yes, I think Simran's here, sir. Simran's here. Simran, you can unmute yourself and just share your experiences as a practitioner yourself.
or maybe a little later. Maybe let's start off with the Q&A and then come back to Simran
Okay,
till she sets up hers.
Sure.
Setup.
All right. So I have one very basic question from Mr. Hemant Mundra here, who says that does value investing always have to be for long term, say 3+ years?
Well, principally, that's the kind of approach you're looking at. I mean, I dare say even 3 sounds little on the lower side.
On the lower side.
On the lower side, because as it is, we are looking at, today we are looking at quarterly results, annual results. The cycles of businesses are not, traditionally when the funds were set up, even in for private equity, etc., they used to be set up on a 5 to 7 year cycle. Most funds used to be set up for 7 years. And the idea was that that 7 year cycle was essentially to understand how the sectors that they're going to invest in would play themselves out. So, the traditional norm is that if you're looking at a steel commodity sector, for instance, 2 years are great sectors, 2 years are average sectors, average years, 3 years are extremely bad years. Okay. It happens in many sectors that it takes years for the. So there are 2 things here. One is that when you're talking of a business cycle of the business itself. Second is the cycle of the company. So it may have the steel cycle may have started earlier, but the company that you're looking at may have started manufacturing steel along the way. So it didn't start off. This cycle didn't start off at the same time the product cycle started or the business cycle started. And you as an investor are coming in at an even later stage. So the concept is that all the cycles, when they get aligned, that's when the return is maximum. Yeah. And you're actually optimizing that return. If your cycles are 2 years, 3 years, and the business cycles are 7 years, then you would take an exit prior to the time that the business actually peaks out. Right. So ability to align the investor cycle, and therefore, value investing requires you to have patience and commitment to that investment opportunity and not exit just because you need that liquidity.
Absolutely.
Okay. So ability to align with that cycle of the business itself is key. Now, Fortune 500 companies, if you notice, they had business cycles of 50 to 80 years earlier. Yeah. In the last few decades, what has happened is that the business cycle of the new technology companies has come down to 20 years. If 20 years is going to be the life cycle of these new businesses, companies like Uber are actually dead because they've already completed their half-life. So you shouldn't be investing in a business in the second half stage of the life cycle itself. Yeah. So the thing is, you would invest as a private equity investor in the first phase of the thing, and then when it gets listed, you catch it. So therefore, some of the discipline which is available in value investing and in private equity, if that can be aligned, and if the value investor gets an opportunity to invest in the early stage before the company gets listed, then you're deriving some of the best advantages of this alignment of cycles. So also the promoter's investment cycle is also different. The promoter's business cycle, initially or in the past, we've had families going into businesses, and the families never thought of selling off their business. So the business would get transferred from grandfather to son to grandson, etc. And there was no concept of selling family business. And in that kind of a context, there's no life cycle of the promoter's investment cycle. It's eternal. So if the investor cycle is aligned with the cycle of the promoter, it makes difference. If it is not, the investor may not get the kind of cycle. And the point, let me try and explain. So the promoter would like to set up new businesses, right? And when they set up new businesses, there's an allocation of capital to that new business. That allocation of capital depletes your free cash flows and is not in the best interest of the investor, and the valuations may not. So if you are willing to wait till that new investment plays itself out in superior returns, which the promoter is expecting, then the investor really gets the benefit. And therefore, Warren Buffett's approach that you buy and hold and keep yourself aligned with the business cycle, and that's the way it is. That it helps. If you need, for some reason, you need to kind of sell and get out, so be it. You can enter later on if you have.
Okay.
Asian
I
Paints
think,
is another great example. People who
yes.
invested in 80s and still not selling that share. People who, a friend of mine put in 20,000 in 1982, that
Wow.
is worth 4.5 crores today. The dividend itself is over 25 lakhs from investment of 20,000. So the kind of returns have been fantastic. I'm sorry, I promised not to mention names of companies, but it just, Asian Paints is such a star performer through the value investing approach. So it's not necessary that you pick up small companies or look at anything where there's a mispricing. If you think the value is great, so Asian Paints has got into not just paints, they've got into home decor and home products now. And that market is going to explode because of people working from home. Right? If you see a great potential in that, it's a value investing opportunity for that business.
Fabulous. So I think I think Simran is sort of back alive as well. Simran, can you unmute yourself and just share your experiences as well?
Yes, I have unmuted.
Yes. So we'd like to know your experiences as a practitioner in the same field, and probably then go ahead as well.
Yes, see, I'm following this strategy from the past 5-6 years. You can say from the year 2015 when I entered in this market. I when I study the companies during that period of time in that initial years, I came across a lot of beautiful ratios like market cap to sales, EV to EBITDA, EV to sales. During a period of 2015 till 2017 peak, uh, uh, from 2015, if we see a lot of good companies and great companies were trading below 1x in the market cap to sales and below 5x in the EV to EBITDA side. So then I keep on doing a lot of research on those companies, and when I found that there's a lot of mismatch in the valuations during that point of time, because they were also generating the free cash flow during that period of time. So it has created humongous returns for the investors. Now again, I'm following that thing, that now the problem is currently in this market, when we are seeing the value investing, is that market cap to sales, EV to EBITDA have all gone sharp up, have gone raised very very heavily at this point of time. It has become very very expensive at this point of time. So but again, what I want to share one thought with everyone, that one should look for the free cash flows, one should look for the market cap to sales, how the interest coverage ratios are, they are performing, and how the company is generating the free cash flow, because free cash flow nowadays, I believe that is one of the most important determinant factor for the survival of the companies going forward. And I just want to share a name of a company. If
Thanks, Simran. Thanks. I think
yeah,
we don't want to make this into a stock pickers session.
yes,
We want to refrain from making any specific recommendations
sure,
on this.
definitely.
Thanks a lot for your views.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Dhanit,
Simran.
there's a question from Dhanit who says, how do you free up capital to to invest in more businesses?
Yeah.
So the thing is, one is getting greedy. So it's like this. Warren Buffett is an institutional investor. So buy and hold is fine with people like them because they continue to receive more and more money from their shareholders. So if you can receive either through what your income sources are, if you can channel more money from your income sources into investing, or you become a professional fund manager and get other people to invest in your fund, and you deploy that money, that could be one approach to increasing the amount of money. But again, let's be very clear that when you're looking at an alternative investment opportunity, are you going to have you reevaluated the existing opportunity? If your new opportunity should be superior to your existing opportunity in the long run and not the short run. The short run, it's possible that your existing opportunity may not be giving returns. But I'm giving you this example: a company where you invested 20,000 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is giving you 25 lakhs of dividend today. So that dividend flow itself when you talk of free cash flows, it's a free cash flow to the investor, right? That itself is creating a huge amount of surplus for you, and that is creating an investable surplus for you. So please try and be a little holistic in the sense that we're not. So traders will look at this opportunity. I bought this, sold it, look for the next. But value investing is something you continue, and believe me, people have made incredible returns by just hanging on and holding on to some of these basic businesses which have grown in India's growth story in the last 30, 40 years. Your pursuit has to be to find out which sectors and which companies and which businesses will do well over the next 20, 25 years in India. And India is a growing growing economy. Growth is fantastic. You've got a great opportunity. The whole world wants to invest in India. You should know. So one of the things, one of my first teachers in investing used to tell me, how do you invest? That's the question we used to ask. He says, look at the products that you buy. Okay. And it's a simplistic way of starting to identify companies. So have you bought that product, or do you know 5 people who have bought that product and say, yes, it's a great product? So you know the consumer products that you buy, you've got great companies around there. Look at the vehicles that you buy or people buy. Fine. So even if you use such simple techniques of saying, you don't have to, and you know that those companies are going to be around for many years. I mean, my grandfather or possibly, used Colgate. My father used Colgate. I'm using Colgate. My granddaughter uses Colgate. So toothpaste is a great business to be in here. And there's nothing to, so if you buy Colgate at every dip, you're going to get fantastic returns there over a period of time. It may not give you the kind of returns that you get in growth opportunity, in growth stocks for a short run. But of course, in the long run, there is safety of capital, there's margin of safety, and you're investing in great businesses, great brands, etc. Are people going to stop using toothpaste? You'll get attracted to opportunities in media, in digital, etc., which are new, and that's the temptation one has to kind of stay away from, unless you're very sure that those businesses are going to be around for the next 15, 20 years. And a lot of businesses and new technology, we don't know what will happen in the next 15, 20 years. So be careful. Make sure you have a long-term perspective on that business in value investing. I'm not saying don't invest in those new business opportunities. But that's not a value investing perspective.
So there's also, I think, 2 questions related here. One from Harshvardhan and one from Kanak as well. That with the sort of changes in technology, with the technological disruptions that we're seeing, Tesla's into electric cars. They are they're literally going all guns blazing with respect to different innovations in this field. Do you think value investing as a concept is dying for all practical purposes? It's a little on the negative side.
So we haven't yet seen the technology for electric vehicles, for instance, stabilizing. The world has not clearly given a verdict whether they want to go in for the technology which Tesla has produced is following, or they want to go for hydrogen cells or some alternative technology. There are a lot of issues of whether batteries should be bought from China or at all, and a lot of issues. So once that basic technology platform is confirmed, and you see the sector growing, and you see 3 or 5 companies consolidating into 80% market share. Today, Tesla has kind of taken away the whole, because it's purely an innovative product. The sector must evolve. The features must be there for all the manufacturers to offer. And then when that competition plays itself out, then you'll see the winners. So go back into 95, 2000 period when telecom came to India. Telecom was new. There were over 40, 50 companies, 4 to 5 companies in each circle. A lot of 45 companies in the telecom space, right? How many exist today? 3 or maybe 4, right? That takes time. But the people who backed Bharti then are today sitting on very good returns. And therefore, you have to identify how will that sector play itself out in the long run, and whether the company that you are identified will be a winner in that space. So it's a combined combination. So you might as well invest in 3, 4 companies as a value investor. That's a venture capital approach, but not a value investor.
Okay, all right.
That's a diversification in that sector if you want to.
Yes.
Will that
I
reduce
think, in
risk?
fact,
It might. Yeah, I think Vandita has written about
yes,
diversity.
Vandita's question was on
Yeah,
predominantly
when the
US
sector is evolving, can you invest in 3, 4 companies and bet
Hmm.
your head? But it doesn't give a track record. So in 2000, people didn't have a track record about telecom companies.
Hmm.
Today they do. But the products also of telecom companies have changed. I mean, earlier we was all voice. Now it's all data. Voice is all free. The whole situation has changed. So it's still not a value investing sector, telecom.
So I'm going to, in the interest of time, take one last question. There's a question from Sushant, and I wanted to take this predominantly because I think gold is one of the most favorite investment areas for the entire country, if I may say so. So, in your opinion, is there any hedge for gold other than using gold derivatives? Is gold negatively correlated to anything?
Well, gold has always been a currency of value in terms of prices. And uh, in the last few years, what has happened is that gold prices have gone up, and they've been steadily going up for the last 15 years. A lot of the biggest buyers of gold in the last 2, 3 years have been the central banks, which means countries are investing in gold uh, as a potential hedge against currency wars. Because are we going to go back to the scenario? So in historically, what used to happen when a king used to be installed, and he would send out his horse Ashwamedh, and so the army would follow, and in that wherever the horse went and where the army conquered, and so that's the space where my currency prevails. Uh, Now, in today's context, currency is also linked to military. So you're talking about China trying to assert itself in terms of establishing a currency as a substitute for dollar. And the wars that you're seeing, both in terms of trade wars and other cold wars that are happening all around us, are actually a point of trying to assert supremacy. Therefore, if the world continues to accept the traditional value of gold, uh, what it has for hundreds of years, which Neil Ferguson has eloquently written about in his book Ascent of Money, then I think you will continue to have the demand for gold. And people are really there is a lot of speculation about gold prices doubling even from here. But do you have instruments to hedge yourself? Well, buying gold in physical quantity is a limited option unless you can really safely keep it somewhere. Because in the last 30, 40 years, the investment opportunities were about investing in different asset classes in different geographies and to get a superior return. Post 2008, 2015, scenario is changing towards saying, I want to invest in places which are safe, not only for my capital, but also. So earlier it was return on capital. In the scenario that we are in today, which is a reversal of globalization and protectionism, and you've already seen exports of many countries just being stopped for various reasons. There now the scenario is return of capital. So preservation of capital is very important. Safety is very important. Security is important. In that scenario, gold becomes an important part. So ETFs are one way of investing in gold. In most mutual funds offer them in India. Internationally, there are a lot of derivatives which are available both in Hong Kong, Singapore, London. There, I mean, you can have an offline conversation. Many opportunities outside India. I would like to talk about some of these things out on camera here.
Okay, all right. So before I close down, what are the three? I know we said that every investor has to make his own checklist, has to, probably what works for one does not work for the other. But at a personal level, what are the three mantras that you follow when you're doing value investing as well?
So one is, of course, as you know, as I go back to that slide on what have been super stocks, the market share has to be great. The scalability has to be superb. So there is something called the opportunity, the value of the opportunity. If that so telecom sector was say 50,000 crores 20 years ago in India. Today it's over 9 lakh crores. the size of the market itself is huge. You're looking at online commerce in India, which was say 1 or 2 billion, but going forward it could be 500 billion. Yeah. So if you're looking at, so that size of opportunity becomes the most important part, and you need to find a company which will be able to capture that size of opportunity by way of technology, superior management, good people, research, etc. So the size of the opportunity really is the key. Which is the sector which is currently nascent or small, and can become a very large portion. Do you see that in crude or in petroleum today? Unlikely, right? You see that in pharmaceuticals? Possibly, because everybody is moving to a healthier way of life and different types of approaches to so pharma, and OTC products and pharma are doing extremely well. The size of opportunities is very good. Food businesses, where process this preference towards processed foods, etc., is shift has is picking up very substantially. So you have to find that size of opportunity which can really become big. Moment you've got that, if we say that we're not going to buy anything from China, and you're going to make all the mobile phones in India, look at the size of that opportunity. Not just mobile phones, so many products which were otherwise or hitherto being imported from China. If you can talk of a replacement business in India, great business.
Agreed.
Construction fittings, how many fittings used to come from China? Now if you say nothing will be allowed to be brought from China, toys, amount of toys we import from China, size of the opportunity, that becomes key.
True. Fair enough, sir. Thank you so much. I think it's been a fantastic session. So much clarity, even for, if I may say, non-finance people like me who've never really come close to finance as well, predominantly because of our own thought processes and likewise. But it's been a great session. I'm just going to quickly let all the others know about our next session as well. The masterclass series happens once in 2 weeks, every Friday. We have our next session, which will also be helpful considering that you need to take a lot of important decisions as well on taking HR decisions using analytics. And we have with us Professor Neeraj Mankad, who's the Assistant Dean for Programs at FLAME, as well as Professor Tejpal Singh Batra, who is visiting faculty at FLAME, also the founder of SSO Consultants, who will be taking this session. So do join us for the same. Registration links, you can find them on our social media pages and otherwise as well. Friday 22nd at 6 o'clock. Thank you so much to everyone. And thank you, Professor Sujay, once again for taking out the time on a very different, I understand that you're not in Pune, you're at Bombay. And for all the alumni and students who are there, you might as well want to catch up with sir if it's possible at Bombay as well.
Thank you, Janju.
Thank you so much, sir. It's been really nice.
For your hosting this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.